What happens when a joke goes too far, and the one you thought was powerless turns the tables? I never expected to be handed official court papers at my own front door. Papers that changed my life and made me realize my harmless birthday prank wasn't so harmless after all. The restaurant buzzed with conversation as I adjusted my red dress and checked my reflection in my phone camera. Tonight was Axton's 36th birthday, and I had plans to make it memorable. Not just for him, but for his uptight parents who always looked at me like I was some kind of disappointment. "Rachel, you look beautiful," Axton said, straightening his tie nervously. He always got anxious around his parents, which honestly annoyed me. June and Walter Ellis sat across from us, looking as formal and stuffy as ever. June wore her usual pearl necklace and that tight smile she reserved for me, while Walter buried himself in the wine menu. "Thank you, honey," I replied, squeezing Axton's hand. "I'm so excited to celebrate you tonight." The truth was, I had been planning this evening for weeks. Not the celebration part. That was Axton's sister Tessa's idea. No, I had been planning something much more entertaining. Something that would finally put these pretentious people in their place and show everyone that I wasn't going to be intimidated by their cold shoulders and judgmental stares. "So, Rachel," June began in her crisp teacher voice, "how's work at the marketing firm?" "Oh, it's wonderful," I said, twirling my wine glass. "Actually, I just landed a huge account. The client specifically requested me because of my creative approach." Axton smiled proudly, but I caught June's slight eye roll. She probably thought I was exaggerating. Walter just nodded politely and went back to studying the appetizer menu like it contained the secrets of the universe. Our daughter Mila, sitting between Axton and me, was coloring on the kids' menu with intense concentration. At 7, she was still blissfully unaware of the tension that always surrounded these family gatherings. I envied her sometimes. "That's great news, sweetheart," Axton said. "You've been working so hard lately." If only he knew what I'd really been up to during those late nights at the office. But that was a secret I intended to keep, at least for now. Dane understood me in ways Axton never could. Where Axton was cautious and boring, Dane was spontaneous and exciting. Where Axton's parents made me feel small, Dane made me feel like a queen. "Yes, well, hard work pays off," June said, though her tone suggested she doubted I knew anything about hard work. That comment lit a fire in my chest. I smiled sweetly and leaned forward. "You're absolutely right, June. Just like how hard work paid off for you in that tiny classroom for 30 years. The table went quiet. Axton's hand tightened around his water glass, and Walter finally looked up from his menu. But I wasn't done. "I mean, it must have been so fulfilling, shaping young minds for such a modest salary. Very noble." "Rachel," Axton said quietly, but I was just getting started. "What? I'm complimenting your mother. Teaching is such an undervalued profession. Not everyone can handle making so little money for so long." June's face had gone pale, and Walter cleared his throat uncomfortably. Even Mila had stopped coloring and was looking around the table with confused eyes. "Maybe we should order," Axton suggested, his voice strained. "Great idea," I said brightly. "I'm starving. All this talk about hard work has given me an appetite." The server appeared as if summoned by the awkward tension, and we placed our orders in relative silence. I could feel the disapproval radiating from June and Walter, but I didn't care. Actually, I felt energized by it. For once, I wasn't the one being made to feel uncomfortable. During dinner, I kept the conversation light but pointed. When Walter mentioned his old engineering job, I made a comment about how quaint it must have been to work with such outdated technology. When June brought up their recent trip to visit Axton's aunt, I wondered aloud how they could afford to travel so much on a fixed income. Each comment was delivered with a smile and a laugh, as if I was just being playful. But I could see the hurt building in their eyes, and it felt like victory. Axton barely touched his food. He kept shooting me warning looks, but I pretended not to notice. This was my night to shine. My night to show them that I wasn't going to be pushed around anymore. So, I said as the server cleared our main course plates, should we do presents now or wait for dessert? Let's wait, Axton said quickly. I think dessert first would be nice. As we waited for the birthday cake I'd ordered, I excused myself to the restroom. Really, I wanted to check my phone. Dane had texted earlier, and I was curious what he'd said. Missing you tonight. Wish I could be there to see you put those snobs in their place. I smiled and typed back quickly. Just getting started. You'd be so proud. When I returned to the table, the cake had arrived. A chocolate masterpiece with Happy 36th Birthday Axton written in elegant script. The server had dimmed the lights, and other diners were starting to look our way. Perfect. Before we sing, I announced, standing up with my wine glass, I'd like to make a toast. Axton's face went white. Rachel, maybe we should just… No, I said, waving him off. This is important. Everyone should hear this. I looked around the table, making eye contact with each person. June and Walter looked terrified, which only encouraged me more. I want to toast Axton's wonderful parents, I began, my voice carrying across the nearby tables. June and Walter, you've raised such an interesting son. A few people at neighboring tables had turned to listen. The spotlight feeling was intoxicating. June, your dedication to mediocrity has been truly inspiring. 30 years of teaching third grade. Imagine the impact of staying in the exact same position for 3 decades. And Walter, your commitment to living the most predictable life possible has been a masterclass in playing it safe. The restaurant had gone quiet around us. Even the servers had stopped moving. But most of all, I continued, raising my glass higher, I want to thank you both for showing me exactly the kind of boring, small-minded life I never want to live. Your son deserves so much more than the limited worldview you've given him, and frankly, so do I. I drained my wine glass in one gulp and smiled at the stunned faces around me. June's eyes filled with tears. Walter's jaw was clenched so tight I thought it might break. Axton looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor, and Mila, sweet, innocent Mila, was staring at me with wide, confused eyes, not understanding why Grandma was crying. Happy birthday, Axton, I said cheerfully, sitting back down. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then June stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Excuse me, she whispered, and hurried toward the exit. Walter followed without a word, leaving his napkin crumpled on the table. Axton sat frozen, his birthday cake untouched, watching his parents flee the restaurant while other diners whispered and stared. The ride home was silent except for Mila's quiet sniffling in the back seat. She kept asking why Grandma and Grandpa had left, why everyone looked sad, why Daddy wasn't talking. Axton's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, and he hadn't said a single word since we'd left the restaurant. I stared out the passenger window, replaying the evening in my mind. The look on June's face when I'd called her mediocre. The way Walter had flinched when I'd mocked his predictable life. The stunned silence from the other diners. It had been perfect. Well, almost perfect. Axton's reaction was more dramatic than I'd expected. I'd thought he'd be embarrassed, maybe a little annoyed, but he'd get over it. He always did. Axton was nothing if not forgiving. Daddy, are you mad at Mummy? Mila asked as we pulled into our driveway. No, sweetheart, Axton said quietly. Daddy's just tired. Let's get you ready for bed. Inside the house, Axton focused entirely on Mila's bedtime routine, while I poured myself another glass of wine and settled onto the couch. I could hear him reading her a story, his voice gentle and patient, despite everything that had happened. That was Axton, always putting Mila first, always being the responsible parent. When he finally came downstairs, I was ready with my defense. Okay, before you say anything, I began, I know tonight got a little intense, but your parents have been cold to me for years, Axton. Years. I was just standing up for myself. Axton sat down in the armchair across from me, not on the couch beside me like he usually did. That should have been my first warning. "A little intense," he said, his voice eerily calm. "Rachel, you humiliated my parents in front of a restaurant full of people. You made my daughter watch her grandmother cry. You turned my birthday dinner into a public spectacle." "Oh, come on," I said, waving my hand dismissively. "Your parents are fine. They're just not used to someone calling them out on their judgmental attitude. Maybe this will teach them to be more welcoming." "Judgmental?" Axton's voice rose slightly. "My parents have never said a single negative word about you to me. Not once. My mother bites her tongue every time you make snide comments about her teaching career. My father pretends not to notice when you roll your eyes at his stories. They've been nothing but polite to you." I laughed. Actually laughed. "Polite?" "Axton, they look at me like I'm trash. Your mother practically sneers every time I open my mouth. Don't tell me you haven't noticed." "What I've noticed," Axton said, standing up, "is that you seem determined to find insults where none exist. What I've noticed is that you go out of your way to make every family gathering about you and your grievances." This wasn't going the way I'd planned. Axton was supposed to be upset for a few hours, maybe sleep on the couch, then forgive me by morning. That's how our fights usually went. But there was something different in his eyes tonight, something I'd never seen before. "Fine," I said, setting down my wine glass harder than necessary. "I'm sorry if I hurt their feelings, but they needed to hear it, Axton. Someone had to tell them that their cold, judgmental attitude isn't acceptable." "They needed to hear what exactly? That 30 years of teaching children makes someone mediocre? That living a quiet, honest life is something to be ashamed of? That my mother, who raised 3 successful children and helped dozens of struggling students over the years, is somehow beneath you?" I felt a flicker of uncertainty, but I pushed it away. "I didn't say she was beneath me. I just said, you said she was mediocre. You mocked her salary. You called their life boring and small-minded. In front of strangers, Rachel. You humiliated 2 people who have never done anything but try to welcome you into their family." "Welcome me?" I stood up too, my anger flaring. "They've been judging me since day one. Every time we visit, your mother makes little comments about my job, my clothes, how I parent Mila. Don't pretend they're innocent victims here." Axton stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him trying to remember any instance of what I was describing. The problem was, there weren't any. June and Walter had always been perfectly polite to me. Reserved, maybe, but never cruel. But I couldn't admit that. Admitting that would mean admitting that tonight had been entirely my fault, entirely unprovoked. And I wasn't ready to do that. "You know what?" I said, grabbing my purse. "I need some air. This conversation is going nowhere." "Where are you going?" Axton asked. "It's almost midnight." "For a drive, to clear my head. Maybe when I get back, you'll be ready to have a rational conversation about this." I headed for the door, but Axton's voice stopped me. "My mother called me crying, Rachel. Actually crying. She wanted to know what she'd done wrong, what she could do to fix things with you. That's the kind of person you humiliated tonight. Someone who's blaming herself for your cruelty." I felt a stab of something. Guilt, maybe, but I pushed it down. "She'll get over it," I said, and walked out. I drove aimlessly for a while, replaying the conversation with Axton. He was overreacting, clearly. His parents would be fine. They'd probably forget all about it by next week. Axton would calm down, I'd make a token apology, and life would go back to normal. Without really planning to, I found myself pulling into the parking lot of Dane's apartment complex. I sat in my car for a moment, then pulled out my phone. "Are you awake?" I texted. The response came immediately. "For you? Always. Come up." Dane's apartment was small but stylish, nothing like the suburban house I shared with Axton. It felt exciting, dangerous. Dane himself was everything Axton wasn't: spontaneous, passionate, uninterested in stability or responsibility. "So," he said, pouring me a glass of wine, "tell me about this dinner." Did you give those snobs what they deserved? I found myself embellishing the story, making June and Walter sound even more pretentious than they actually were, making my comments seem more justified. Dane laughed and praised my courage in standing up to them. Axton's probably sulking, I said, curling up next to Dane on his couch. He hates conflict. He'd rather just let his parents treat me like garbage than rock the boat. You deserve better, Dane said, stroking my hair. You deserve someone who appreciates your spirit, your intelligence, someone who doesn't try to dim your light to keep other people comfortable. It was exactly what I wanted to hear. With Dane, I felt justified, vindicated. He understood me in a way Axton never had. Axton was always trying to smooth things over, to keep everyone happy. Dane encouraged me to be bold, to take what I wanted. I stayed at Dane's apartment until almost 3 a.m, then drove home through empty streets. Axton was asleep on the couch, still fully dressed. I crept upstairs to our bedroom and fell into bed, exhausted but somehow satisfied. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Mila's voice downstairs. Axton was making her breakfast, his voice gentle and normal as he asked about her plans for the day. I could smell coffee and bacon, the usual weekend morning routine. Maybe everything would be fine after all. But when I came downstairs, Axton barely looked at me. He poured me a cup of coffee without being asked, but there was no warmth in the gesture. It was mechanical, distant. "Morning," I said brightly, kissing Mila's forehead. "How's my baby girl?" "Daddy made pancakes," Mila said, but she seemed subdued. "Are Grandma and Grandpa coming over today?" Axton and I exchanged a look. Usually, his parents came over the Sunday after his birthday to give him presents and spend time with Mila. "Not today, sweetheart," Axton said gently. "Maybe next weekend." After Mila finished eating and went to watch cartoons, Axton and I sat at the kitchen table in uncomfortable silence. I waited for him to say something, to start the conversation, but he just sat there drinking his coffee and staring out the window. "So," I finally said, "are we going to talk about last night?" "What's there to talk about?" Axton asked, still not looking at me. "You made your feelings about my family very clear." "Axton, come on. You're acting like I committed some terrible crime. I just spoke my mind." He finally turned to look at me, and I was startled by the coldness in his eyes. "You spoke your mind about people who love you, people who have tried to include you, to make you feel welcome. And you did it in the cruelest way possible." "They don't love me," I protested. "They tolerate me. There's a difference." Axton shook his head slowly. "You know what, Rachel? Maybe you're right. Maybe after last night they don't love you anymore. Maybe you've finally gotten what you wanted." He stood up and rinsed his coffee mug in the sink, then headed toward the stairs. "Where are you going?" I asked. "To call my parents, to apologize for my wife's behavior, and try to repair some of the damage you've done." After he left the room, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at my reflection in the dark coffee. For just a moment, I wondered if maybe I had gone too far. But then I remembered Dane's words from the night before, his praise for my courage, his assurance that I deserved better. No, I decided, I wasn't going to feel guilty for standing up for myself. If Axton's parents couldn't handle a little honesty, that was their problem, not mine. I pulled out my phone and texted Dane. "Coffee later. I need to see a friendly face." His response was immediate. "Always. Can't wait to hear how the aftermath went." I smiled and headed upstairs to get dressed. Let Axton sulk and make his phone calls. I had someone who actually appreciated me, someone who understood that sometimes you had to be bold to get what you deserved. The next few weeks fell into an uncomfortable rhythm. Axton was polite but distant, going through the motions of our daily life without any real warmth. He went to work, came home, helped Mila with homework, and went to bed early. We barely spoke beyond the necessities of running a household. His parents hadn't called once since the birthday dinner. Usually, June called at least twice a week to check on Mila or to invite us for Sunday dinner. The silence felt strange, though I told myself I was relieved. No more awkward family gatherings, No more judgmental looks, no more walking on eggshells around their delicate sensibilities. But Mila noticed. She kept asking when she could see Grandma and Grandpa, why they didn't call anymore, if they were mad at her. Each question was like a small knife twist, especially when Axton would comfort her with promises that everything would be okay soon. I found myself spending more and more time texting with Dane. He was like a lifeline, the one person who understood what I was going through. While Axton gave me the cold shoulder, Dane sent me funny memes and compliments that brightened my day. While Axton's family froze me out, Dane made me feel wanted and appreciated. "Meeting at the usual place," he texted one Thursday afternoon. I looked around the marketing office, at my coworkers bent over their computers, at the stack of campaign proposals on my desk. Everything felt grey and boring compared to the excitement of sneaking away to see Dane. "Give me 20 minutes, I replied. The Blue Moon Cafe had become our regular spot. It was small and cozy, tucked away in a part of town where I was unlikely to run into anyone I knew. Dane was already there when I arrived, sitting in our usual corner booth with 2 coffee cups waiting. "You look stressed," he said, standing to kiss my cheek. The gesture felt natural now, though it had made me nervous the first few times. "Axton's still being impossible," I said, sliding into the booth across from him. "He's barely speaking to me. It's like he thinks I'm some kind of monster for finally standing up to his parents." "He's punishing you," Dane said, reaching across to squeeze my hand. "Classic manipulation tactic. Make you feel guilty so you'll apologize and go back to being the perfect submissive daughter-in-law." I nodded, grateful that someone finally understood. "Exactly. He wants me to grovel and beg forgiveness for having a backbone." "You're too good for that life, Rachel. You're smart, beautiful, ambitious. You deserve someone who celebrates those qualities instead of trying to suppress them." Dane always knew exactly what to say. With him, I felt like the person I was meant to be, confident, desirable, free. Not like the version of myself I'd become at home, constantly walking on eggshells and second-guessing every word. "I keep thinking about what you said," I told him, "about deserving better. Sometimes I wonder what my life would be like if I'd never settled for safe and boring." Dane's eyes lit up. "It's not too late, you know. People change their lives all the time. The question is whether you're brave enough to take what you really want." We talked for over an hour, our conversation ranging from my frustrations at home to our shared dreams of a more exciting life. Dane told me about his plans to open his own coffee shop, maybe in Portland or Austin, somewhere creative and vibrant. He painted a picture of a life full of possibility, adventure, passion, everything my current life lacked. When I finally checked my phone, I had 3 missed calls from my sister Tessa and 2 texts asking where I was. "I should go," I said reluctantly. "Tessa's probably wondering why I'm not answering." "Tell her you were in a long meeting," Dane suggested, "or better yet, tell her the truth. Maybe it's time to stop hiding who you really are." I laughed, but the idea sent a thrill through me. What would it be like to stop pretending, to stop acting like I was happy with my mundane life? "Maybe someday," I said, "when I'm ready." Dane walked me to my car, his hand warm on the small of my back. "I'm here whenever you need me," he said. "Whatever you decide, I'll support you." Driving back to the office, I felt energized in a way I hadn't in months. Dane believed in me, saw my potential, encouraged me to want more. It was intoxicating after weeks of Axton's cold disapproval. But when I got back to work, Tessa was waiting by my desk, her arms crossed and a worried expression on her face. "Where were you?" she asked. "I called 3 times. "Long meeting with a client," I said smoothly, settling into my chair. "You know how these campaign presentations can drag on." Tessa studied my face for a moment. "Which client?" "The Morrison account," I said, pulling up some files on my computer to look busy. "They want to revise their entire strategy." "Rachel," Tessa said, sitting on the edge of my desk, "can we talk? Privately." We went to the break room, which was empty except for the hum of the vending machines. Tessa poured herself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, still watching me with that concerned expression. "I'm worried about you," she said finally. "Ever since Axton's birthday, you've been different, distracted, and now you're disappearing for hours without explanation." "I'm fine," I said, perhaps a bit too quickly. "Just dealing with some stress at home." "Because of what happened at the restaurant?" I felt a flash of irritation. Even my own sister was taking Axton's side. "Because Axton is being a child about the whole thing. He's giving me the silent treatment instead of dealing with the real issues in our relationship." Tessa sipped her coffee, choosing her words carefully. "Rachel, I love you, but what you said to June and Walter was really harsh. I was there, remember? I saw their faces." "So you're taking their side too?" "I'm not taking anyone's side. I'm trying to understand why you felt the need to hurt two people who've never been anything but kind to you." I stared at my sister, feeling suddenly alone. If Tessa couldn't understand, if even she was going to judge me, then who did I have left? Well, I had Dane. Dane, who appreciated my strength, who encouraged me to stand up for myself, who saw me as more than just Axton's wife or Mila's mother. "You know what?" I said, standing up. "I don't need this. I get enough judgment at home." "Rachel, wait." But I was already walking away, back to my desk where I could lose myself in work and forget about everyone's disappointment in me. Everyone except Dane, who was probably the only person in my life who truly understood me. That evening at home, the tension was thick enough to cut. Axton made dinner while I helped Mila with her math homework, both of us maintaining the polite distance that had become our new normal. Mila chatted about her day at school, filling the silence between her parents with 7-year-old observations about her teacher, her friends, the book they were reading in class. "Mrs. Peterson says we're going to write letters to our families," Mila announced over dinner, "about people we love and why they're special." Axton smiled at her, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him in weeks. "That sounds like a wonderful project. Who are you going to write about?" "Everyone," Mila said enthusiastically. "You and Mommy and Grandma June and Grandpa Walter and Aunt Tessa and—" "Maybe we should focus on just a few people," I interrupted, not wanting to hear about how wonderful Axton's parents were. "You don't want your letter to be too long." Mila's face fell slightly. "But I love everyone. Why can't I write about everyone?" Axton reached over to squeeze her hand. "You can write about whoever you want, sweetheart. There's no limit on love." The comment felt pointed, directed at me, and I bristled, but before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text. I glanced at it under the table. "Thinking about you. Hope your evening is better than expected." I smiled despite myself, then quickly put the phone away, but not quickly enough. Axton had noticed the change in my expression, the way my mood had suddenly lifted. "Work?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. "Just Tessa," I lied, "checking in about weekend plans." Axton nodded, but I caught him glancing at my phone when he thought I wasn't looking. A small part of me wondered if he suspected something, but I pushed the thought away. Axton trusted me completely, maybe too completely. It was one of his weaknesses, that blind faith in people's goodness. After Mila went to bed, I told Axton I needed to run to the store for milk. Really, I just wanted to call Dane back without worrying about being overheard. I sat in the grocery store parking lot, listening to Dane's voice tell me about his day, his plans, his thoughts about us. He made me laugh in a way I hadn't in months, made me feel alive and desired and appreciated. "I wish I could see you tonight," he said. "I hate that you have to go back to that cold house, to someone who doesn't appreciate what he has." "Soon," I promised. "Things are going to change soon." When I got home with the milk I'd actually remembered to buy, Axton was in his office, working late on client files. He looked up when I passed the doorway, and for a moment, our eyes met. There was something searching in his gaze, as if he was trying to read my thoughts. "Everything okay?" I asked. Fine, he said, turning back to his computer. Just catching up on some paperwork. But as I headed upstairs, I could feel his eyes on my back, and I wondered what exactly he was thinking. Axton had always been observant, detail-oriented. It was what made him good at his job as an accountant. But lately, I'd caught him paying attention to things he'd never noticed before. My phone, my schedule, the way I smiled at unexpected moments. I told myself I was being paranoid. Axton trusted me, maybe more than I deserved. He would never suspect that his boring, predictable wife was capable of the kind of excitement I'd found with Dane. But as I lay in bed that night, listening to Axton's quiet breathing beside me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting. The careful balance I'd been maintaining between my two lives felt suddenly precarious, like I was walking a tightrope that was starting to sway. The office Christmas party was exactly the kind of event I usually dreaded: forced mingling with co-workers, awkward small talk, and cheap wine in plastic cups. But this year felt different. This year, I had stories to tell, grievances to air, and a captive audience of people who barely knew Axton or his family. You should have seen their faces, I was saying to a group of colleagues from the marketing department. I mean, who gets that upset over a little birthday toast? Jennifer from accounting laughed and took another sip of wine. What exactly did you say? I launched into my version of the story, the one I'd perfected over the past month of telling it to anyone who would listen. In my version, June and Walter were even more pretentious, their reaction even more dramatic, and my comments more justified and witty. So I raised my glass, I continued, gesturing with my own plastic cup, and I said, "Thank you, June, for showing me exactly the kind of boring, small-minded life I never want to live." The group erupted in laughter, and I felt that familiar rush of being the center of attention. This was what I'd been missing at home: appreciation for my wit, admiration for my boldness. "You actually said that?" asked Mike from the creative team. "In front of the whole restaurant?" "Every word," I confirmed proudly. Someone had to put them in their place. They've been looking down on me for years. "Good for you," said Jennifer. "I can't stand judgmental in-laws. My mother-in-law once criticized the way I folded towels. Towels." The conversation flowed from there, with everyone sharing their own in-law horror stories. But mine was clearly the most dramatic, the most satisfying. I was the hero of my own story, the woman who'd finally stood up to her oppressors. What I didn't notice was Thomas from HR standing nearby, close enough to overhear. Thomas, who had met Axton at several company events over the years. Thomas, who knew that Axton was a quiet, decent man, and that his parents had always seemed perfectly pleasant during their brief interactions. I also didn't notice when Thomas stepped outside to make a phone call. The party continued, and I found myself holding court with different groups throughout the evening. Each time I told the story, it got a little more embellished, a little more dramatic. June became more condescending, Walter more pretentious, and my response more brilliantly cutting. The best part, I told a group near the dessert table, is that Axton is still sulking about it. Like, get over it. They're grown adults. They can handle a little honesty. "Some people can't handle the truth," agreed Sarah from the design team. "Sounds like your husband needs to grow a backbone." "Exactly," I said, feeling vindicated. "He's so worried about keeping everyone happy that he can't see how toxic his parents really are." I was having such a good time that I almost forgot to check my phone. When I finally did, around 9:30, I had several texts from Dane. "How's the party? Showing those co-workers how fabulous you are? Wish I could be there to see you in action. Save me some of that wit for later." I smiled and typed back, "Party's boring, but I'm livening things up. Wish you were here too." "Where are you going?" I asked, but he was already heading for the exit. I tried to follow him, but got caught up in conversations with other co-workers. By the time I made it outside, Axton was nowhere to be seen. "Did you see where my husband went?" I asked the security guard. "The tall guy in the blue shirt. He got in his car and left about 5 minutes ago." I felt a flicker of annoyance. Axton was supposed to be my ride home. Now I'd have to call an Uber or beg a ride from someone else. But the annoyance quickly faded as I spotted a familiar figure approaching across the parking lot. Dane had texted that he might stop by, and there he was, looking handsome in his leather jacket and dark jeans. "Fancy meeting you here," he said with a grin. "I was just in the neighborhood." "Perfect timing," I said, suddenly not caring at all that Axton had left without me. "Want to come in? I'll introduce you around." Dane's presence transformed the rest of the evening. He was charming and funny, asking all the right questions and laughing at everyone's stories. When I told my birthday dinner story again, this time with Dane as my audience, it felt even more triumphant. "You're lucky to have such a brave woman," Dane told my coworkers. "Not everyone has the courage to speak truth to power." I basked in his praise and in the admiring looks from my colleagues. This was what I deserved. Someone who appreciated my strength, who encouraged my boldness instead of trying to suppress it. We stayed until the party ended, then went to a nearby bar for drinks. I texted Axton to let him know I'd found another ride home, but he didn't respond. Probably still sulking, I thought. "You were amazing tonight," Dane said as we sat in a quiet corner booth. "Watching you command that room, it was incredible. You're wasted in that suburban life." "I've been thinking the same thing," I admitted. "Maybe it's time for some changes." Dane reached across the table to take my hand. "I meant what I said about Portland. There's nothing keeping me here except you. If you ever decide you want something different, something better..." The possibility hung in the air between us, exciting and terrifying. A new life, a fresh start, someone who truly understood and appreciated me. It was everything I'd been dreaming about. But there was Mila to consider, and my job, and the life I'd built, even if it wasn't perfect. "I need time to think," I said, "but I'm not saying no." Dane smiled and squeezed my hand. "That's all I can ask for." I got home after midnight to find the house dark and silent. Axton's car was in the driveway, but he was already asleep, or pretending to be. I crept upstairs, feeling like a teenager sneaking in past curfew. The next morning, Axton was making coffee when I came downstairs. He looked tired, older somehow, and there were dark circles under his eyes. "How was the rest of the party?" he asked without looking at me. "Fine," I said, pouring myself a cup. "You missed some good stories. Jennifer from accounting has the worst mother-in-law stories you've ever heard." Axton nodded absently. "I'm sure." "Why did you leave so early? I looked for you around 10 and you were gone." Finally, Axton turned to face me. "I heard your story, Rachel, about my parents, about me." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "Thomas called me. He was concerned about some things he overheard at the party, about how you've been talking about my family, about our marriage." I felt heat rise in my cheeks. Thomas had no right to... To what? To be worried when he heard you publicly humiliating people he knows and respects. To be concerned when you called me spineless in front of our colleagues. "I never said you were spineless. You said I needed to grow a backbone. You said I was too worried about keeping everyone happy to see how toxic my parents are. You turned our private problems into entertainment for your co-workers." I wanted to deny it, to tell him he was overreacting, but the words stuck in my throat. Because he was right, I had turned our problems into stories, our pain into punchlines. "Axton, I was just venting. Everyone complains about their families sometimes." This wasn't complaining, Rachel. This was character assassination. And the worst part is, you seemed to enjoy it. Thomas said you were laughing, performing for an audience. Before I could respond, Mila came bounding down the stairs in her pajamas, her hair messy from sleep. "Morning, Mummy." "Morning, Daddy," she said cheerfully, oblivious to the tension in the room. Axton's expression immediately softened as he lifted her up for a hug. "Morning, sweetheart. Want some pancakes?" "Yes, please." As Axton busied himself with breakfast preparations, I sat at the kitchen table, feeling strangely hollow. The triumph I'd felt the night before had evaporated, leaving behind something that might have been shame if I'd let myself feel it. But I didn't let myself feel it. Instead, I thought about Dane's words, his encouragement, his vision of a different life. Maybe Axton was right that I'd been performing last night, but maybe that performance had shown me who I really was, someone too vibrant and dynamic for this small, suffocating life. My phone buzzed with a text from Dane. "Thank you for an amazing evening. Can't stop thinking about what we discussed. The offer stands whenever you're ready." I smiled and quickly deleted the message, but not before Axton caught the expression on my face. Our eyes met across the kitchen, and I saw something new there. Not just hurt or disappointment, but a cold, calculating look I'd never seen before. For the first time, I wondered if Axton might be more observant than I'd given him credit for. And for the first time, that thought made me nervous. 3 weeks after the Christmas party, the house felt like glass, fragile, transparent, ready to shatter. Axton watched my every move, casual questions about texts, meetings, late nights. I dismissed him as paranoid, but guilt gnawed deeper. My lies about working late, hid meetings with Dane, where we dreamed of Portland, a coffee shop, a fresh start. Tuesday evening, I told Axton I was on the Henderson campaign. Instead, I met Dane at our cafe. He showed photos of a charming storefront, exposed brick, big windows. "We could make this work," he said. "No more hiding. Your marriage was already over." His words absolved me. We talked logistics, telling Axton, Mila, divorce, custody. Absorbed, I didn't notice Axton at a corner table, hidden behind a newspaper, snapping photos. Home, Axton waited in the living room with a manila folder. "How was work?" "Long day." He opened it. Photos of us holding hands, leaning close. "I called your office. You left at 4:30. Blood drained from my face. "I went to the library." "Stop." His voice cut sharp. "I have photos, statements, records, months of lies, secret meetings, marital funds spent on him." 3 months, I whispered when he asked how long. Axton closed his eyes, pain raw. 3 months of betrayal while I tried to save us. "Our marriage was dying," I said. "We grew apart." "You never tried to fix it. You chose him instead." He slid a lawyer's card across the table. "Call tomorrow. Find somewhere else to stay. Think how to explain this to Mila." "You're throwing me out." "I'm giving you the freedom you want. From me, from my toxic family." His calm destroyed me more than anger could. "What about Mila? You'll have visitation, assuming she fits your new life." I packed in silence while Axton called someone. Lawyer, parents. Upstairs, regret flickered. I'd destroyed a life worth saving, never tried to repair it. The glass house shattered. All that remained were sharp pieces and the weight of consequences I could no longer escape. 3 weeks later, in a sterile conference room, Axton's sharp lawyer, Patricia Wells, laid out her thick folder. Photos of me with Dane at cafes in his apartment, phone records, credit card charges, witness statements from the birthday dinner humiliation, co-worker testimony about my disparaging comments, and school reports detailing Mila's rising anxiety, behavioral issues, and questions about her grandparents' absence. My court-appointed attorney, James Murphy, looked outmatched. "Supervised visitation," I protested. "She's my daughter." "Your pattern of deception, infidelity, and emotional instability raises serious concerns about judgment and priorities," Patricia said calmly. "You spent marital funds on the affair, lied repeatedly, exposed Mila to marital chaos, and publicly humiliated her grandparents in front of her." Axton spoke quietly. "I'm not trying to keep Mila from you, but I need to protect her from more instability. You conducted a secret affair in our home, lied for months, and showed no remorse." The proposed terms hit hard: primary custody to Axton, supervised visits twice weekly for 4 hours, mandatory therapy and parenting classes before reconsideration. How can you be so cold? I asked Axton in the hallway afterward. He met my eyes. The man who trusted you completely is gone. You killed him with lies, betrayal, and cruelty. This is what's left. 3 months later, the divorce finalized. Limited custody, alimony barely covering my studio rent, strict requirements to earn unsupervised time. Dane moved to Portland, calling our relationship too complicated. Axton remarried a kind school nurse. Mila thrived in their stable home. 6 months on, I finally got unsupervised visits. Mila was polite, affectionate, but wary. Her eyes carried scars I'd inflicted. She spoke of Daddy's new wife, Grandma June's cookies, a family I'd once had and lost chasing illusion. I'd traded real love, stability, and my daughter's trust for fleeting excitement. Freedom tasted like loneliness. Some consequences scar forever. Some losses can't be rebuilt.